I had mixed sleeping pills into the tea I gave to my husband and mother-in-law. Now I felt a strange calm, knowing neither of them would wake up before morning. They would never know what was going to unfold tonight. I peeked into my mother-in-law's room. She was sound asleep, completely unaware. Satisfied, I changed my clothes, applied some makeup, and critically examined myself in the mirror. I looked stunning, so beautiful that I felt confident. When I reached the herbalist's shop, he would surely be pleased to see me, and then he would reveal the secret I had been dying to know. Both my husband and mother-in-law were in a deep sleep, but I still had to be cautious. I had to avoid being noticed by anyone in the neighborhood. My brother-in-law's house was nearby. I glanced inside from the outside. It was completely dark. That gave me confidence. No one would ever know what I was up to tonight. The herbalist's shop wasn't far from my house. He had specifically called me to the shop instead of his home because his wife and children were there. Meeting me at home was impossible for him. When I entered the shop, I found him waiting for me. The admiration in his eyes was obvious. He pulled me into a tight embrace and, in a hushed, intoxicated voice, whispered into my ear, "Did anyone see you coming here?" His closeness made me uneasy. I had never been this close to another man before. Even though I had been married for a month, my husband hadn't touched me, nor had he come close to me. Initially, I stayed silent, assuming it was because of my own shyness. I didn't ask him anything, nor did I complain, but as time passed, my hesitation turned into frustration and anger. I couldn't understand why he behaved this way. Did he not like me? Was there someone else in his life? If he loved someone else, why did he marry me? After 2 months of this cold behavior, I finally set my shame aside and confronted him. At first, he looked startled, then said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. How can you ask me such a question? A woman with any sense of modesty would rather die than talk to her husband like this." His words silenced me. Maybe I was wrong to ask. Maybe it was inappropriate of me to question my husband like that. But the question still haunted me. Why had my husband not established a relationship with me yet? What was my fault in all this? Everyone said I was exceptionally beautiful, someone who could rule her husband's heart. Yet the reality was the opposite. Forget ruling his heart, my husband wouldn't even look at me. Whenever I was in the room with him, he seemed irritated, as if he wanted nothing more than to escape. 2 more months passed, and my mother-in-law began asking me about good news every chance she got. Her questions embarrassed and frustrated me. How could I explain that when my husband hadn't even come close to me, there was no way I could become a mother? Fed up, I shared my troubles with a close friend. She suggested, "There's a new herbalist in our village, very wise and skilled. I'm sure he can help you." The next day, I made an excuse to my mother-in-law, saying I was visiting my mother, and secretly went to the herbalist shop with my friend. Thankfully, the shop wasn't crowded, but I still felt ashamed to talk about such a personal matter. The herbalist noticed my hesitation and asked my friend to leave the room. "Now, tell me openly, what's the problem?" he said. When I finally explained everything, he looked at me thoughtfully and said, "I have a solution for your problem. I can give you medicine that will make your husband as strong as 100 men. But it's expensive." Hearing the price, I was alarmed. Where could I find that much money? Seeing my worry, the herbalist leaned closer and said, "I can give you the medicine for free, but you'll have to do something for me." His words stunned me. He continued, "You'll have to spend 1 night with me." I was horrified. He was as old as my father. How could he even suggest such a thing? But deep down, I knew he was the only one who could solve this problem. If he refused to help, I might have to live like this for the rest of my life. I felt trapped. I had no choice but to agree. Still, I worried. What excuse could I give to leave the house? What if someone saw me? The herbalist had a solution for that too. He handed me sleeping pills and said, "Mix these into your husband and mother-in-law's tea. Once they're asleep, you can come to me without any trouble." With trembling hands, I mixed the pills into their tea. They drank it and soon fell into a deep, oblivious sleep. And now here I was, at the herbalist's shop, meeting a man alone for the first time in my life. This was all new and strange for me, but also oddly thrilling. Before I left, the herbalist handed me the medicine as promised. He had kept his word. When I returned home with the medicine, I was filled with joy. Tonight, for the first time, I felt hope for a better future. Finally, I thought my lifelong dream was about to come true. I had protected my emotions and desires all my life, believing that they were meant only for my husband. I was his, and I should never betray him. But what had happened to me recently was nothing less than a devastating blow. I realized my husband was not capable of fulfilling my rights as a wife. He was impotent. But with this medicine, I believed everything would change. My husband would recover, and my unfulfilled wishes would finally be realized. The next day, my mother-in-law told me she was going to the market and would return shortly. After she left, I busied myself with household chores. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Surprised, I wondered why my mother-in-law had returned so quickly. When I opened the door, I saw my brother-in-law standing there with a strange glint in his eyes. He stepped inside and casually said, "I saw Mother leaving and thought I'd stop by to check on you." His visit made me uneasy. Why would he come inside just because I was alone? Before I could process his intentions, he dropped a bombshell. "Where did you go last night?" he asked. I tried to keep my expression neutral and said, "I was at home. Where else would I go at night?" But he let out a strange laugh and said, "I know exactly where you went." Then he pulled out his phone and played a recording. My heart stopped. It showed me lost in the forbidden world of pleasure with the herbalist. Terror gripped me as I watched the video. My body went cold and goosebumps covered my skin. He stared at me with a malicious smile and said, "If you don't want me to tell your husband or anyone else, you'll have to do the same with me." I was horrified. I folded my hands, pleading with him. "Please don't tell anyone. If my husband finds out, my life will be ruined." But he showed no mercy. "If you want me to stay quiet, you'll have to make me happy too. Otherwise, I'll expose everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was my husband's brother, part of the same family whose honor I was supposed to protect. How could he even think this way about me? Instead of questioning me about my mistakes, he was using my vulnerability to blackmail me. I tried explaining my situation to him, telling him why I had gone to the herbalist. But he only smirked and said, "I can fulfill all your desires too. If my brother doesn't give you the attention you deserve, I will give you all the time you need," my brother-in-law said. Just then, my mother-in-law returned home, and I silently thanked God. Who knows what he might have done otherwise? That night, when my husband came home, I gave him the herbalist medicine mixed with water. Just as the herbalist had promised, it worked. From then on, I gave my husband the medicine every day. Now I had no complaints or frustrations with him. I was even happy, knowing my husband could finally fulfill his duties. But on the other hand, my brother-in-law continued to blackmail me relentlessly. He threatened to reveal everything to the family. At the same time, the herbalist sent me messages through my friend, insisting that I meet him again. Left with no choice, I reluctantly visited him. This time, the herbalist tried to pressure me into meeting him more frequently. His words terrified me. I begged him not to ruin my life and destroy my home, but he wasn't willing to listen. "If you want your husband to fully recover and stay healthy forever, I've prepared a special medicine," he said. "It will fix everything, but only if you do as I say." I felt trapped, unsure of what to do. At home, my brother-in-law had started behaving even more inappropriately. He now made suggestive remarks about me, even in front of my husband and mother-in-law. My husband, noticing his odd behavior, began to grow suspicious. One day, he asked me privately, "Why does my brother talk to you like that? Has something happened between you two?" His question sent shivers down my spine. I managed to dismiss it and assured him there was nothing to worry about. But deep inside, I feared what would happen if he found out the truth. Things took a dramatic turn when my brother-in-law tried to force himself on me one day. Just then, my husband unexpectedly came home. He found us together in the room and his expression immediately changed. My brother-in-law quickly changed his tone and explained, "I had a headache and came to ask for some tea. My wife is visiting her parents, so I thought I'd ask Bobby for help." My husband smiled and walked away without saying much. He didn't bring up the incident again, nor did he ask me any questions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he suspected something. Over time, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head and that my husband wasn't giving it much importance. But my fears lingered. Meanwhile, the herbalist continued to send messages through my friend, urging me to meet him. I avoided him as much as I could. After all, I had already achieved what I wanted. My husband's health was restored. There was no reason for me to meet the herbalist again. My husband's condition had started to worsen again, and the herbalist's words echoed in my mind. He had promised a special medicine that could permanently cure him. I knew I had no choice but to visit the herbalist once more. That day, my husband told me, "I won't be home tonight. I have to travel to another city for work." Hearing this, I decided to take advantage of the situation. Tonight, I would go to the herbalist shop. Such an opportunity wouldn't come often. Once again, I gave my mother-in-law tea with sleeping pills and waited for midnight. I knew my brother-in-law would likely still be awake. Last time he had seen me leaving, and I feared he might catch me again. He had already been acting inappropriately, and his behavior toward me was becoming unbearable. As I waited for the night to deepen, I suddenly heard a faint sound at the door. Startled, I wondered who could be outside at this hour. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see my brother-in-law standing there. Before I could react, he barged into the room and said, "You keep running away from me, but I love you. I can make you happier than my brother ever could. Why are you so afraid of me? Am I worse than that herbalist?" His words made me cry. I pleaded with him, "I am your brother's wife. You shouldn't do this to me. Have some respect for your family." But he was overcome with his emotions and wouldn't listen. He tried to force himself on me, while I kept resisting and telling him, "I am not that kind of woman. Everything I've done was out of desperation. You don't understand the pain and humiliation I've been through." Still, my words had no effect on him. As I struggled, my eyes caught sight of the door, and there stood my husband, frozen in disbelief. He had clearly heard everything. My blood ran cold, and my brother-in-law's face turned pale with fear. He was terrified of his elder brother. Desperately, he tried to twist the situation. "Your wife called me into her room," he lied. "She's trying to tempt me. She says you're not a real man and can't fulfill her desires." But my husband slapped him hard across the face and shouted, "I heard everything. I know my wife is not at fault. You were trying to force yourself on her." Hearing his words filled me with immense relief. My husband believed me. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if he had doubted me and thrown me out of the house. My family wouldn't have accepted me back either. My brothers and their wives ruled the household, and they wouldn't have tolerated me for long. But just as I was beginning to feel safe, the next moment turned my world upside down. My brother-in-law, desperate to prove his innocence, pulled out his phone and showed my husband the video of me with the herbalist. As my husband watched the video, his expression began to change with every passing second. His expression grew darker with every passing second, and his eyes were filled with rage as though blood coursed through them. He advanced toward me with a fierce look, and I thought this was the end. In desperation, I fell to his feet and cried out, "I only did this out of helplessness. If you had fulfilled your responsibilities as a husband, if you had sought treatment, I would never have done such a thing." My words stopped him mid-action, his hand frozen in the air. Slowly, his anger seemed to dissipate, replaced by a silent, pained expression. Without a word, he threw his brother out of the house and left the room. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. He left for work without eating breakfast, and I realized my mother-in-law remained blissfully unaware of the events of the previous night. The entire day felt like walking on hot coals. I was terrified about my future. What if he decided to throw me out of the house? Where would I go? My family would never take me back, not in a way that allowed me to live with dignity. When he returned that evening, his demeanor was cold and distant. He refused to eat and retreated to his room, lost in thought. Gathering all my courage, I entered the room and sat before him. With tears streaming down my face and folded hands, I pleaded, "Please forgive me for whatever has happened. I never intended to deceive you. Everything I did was out of desperation. Your brother tried to blackmail me repeatedly. I never thought of being with him, and I would rather die than betray you like that." I broke into uncontrollable sobs. He looked at me with a deep sadness in his eyes and finally spoke, "I have no grievances against you. I'm angry with myself for failing to understand your emotions, for ignoring your needs. A wife has feelings and desires too, and I was too lost in my insecurities to fulfill my duties." He paused, his voice trembling with regret. I let my fear of shame stop me from seeking treatment, but I never thought my weakness would push us to this breaking point. I'm ashamed of myself for putting you in such a position, but I won't let my mistakes destroy us. I trust you, and I'm not throwing you out of this house. His words filled me with gratitude. For the first time, I saw the greatness of his character. He not only warned his brother to stay away from me, but also ensured his mother remained unaware of what had transpired. My mother-in-law, oblivious to everything, continued with life as usual. As for my brother-in-law, he avoided me entirely. His guilt was evident in his every glance. Over time, my husband sought treatment from a skilled herbalist in the city. The results were remarkable. Not only did he recover, but he also became a more attentive and loving husband. Eventually, he decided to move us to the city for a fresh start. There, we began rebuilding our lives, leaving behind the shadows of the past. With proper treatment, he regained his health completely. Not long after, we were blessed with a child, a gift that brought immeasurable joy to our lives. The bond between us deepened, and I could finally let go of the pain and humiliation I had endured. My visits to my brother-in-law's home became rare, limited to special occasions. On one such instance, my mother-in-law asked me to accompany her, but my husband firmly declined, saying, "There's no need for her to go there." She was shocked by his response, but chose to remain silent. She didn't know the truth, nor did she question his reasons. One day, I heard that my brother-in-law had been blessed with a daughter. The very next day, he stood before me, hands folded, his face full of remorse. "I've wronged you," he said. "I didn't understand the weight of my actions. But now that I have a daughter of my own, I realize how precious a daughter's dignity is. I was blinded by my selfishness and made terrible mistakes. Please forgive me." His words stirred something in me. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I forgive you," I said, letting go of the bitterness in my heart. My husband, too, showed his greatness of spirit. He forgave his brother, choosing to move forward rather than dwell on the past. Life in the city brought us peace and stability. The wounds of the past began to heal, and our family thrived. I learned that even in the darkest moments, hope can find its way back. As for my husband and me, we discovered a new level of understanding and love in our relationship. Together, we built a life full of trust, compassion, and gratitude for the second chance we had been given. If you enjoyed this story and its journey of redemption and hope, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of resilience and emotional depth.